So I've been told that my role here is to get everybody revved up and excited for our keynote presentation. And I thought about that and I said, well, talking about pharmacy is going to be very hard to get people revved up. So perhaps we should talk about the reboot of Roseanne or something along those lines. And I figured that would give some excitement to the room on the first episode. But in all seriousness, I'd like to welcome everyone to the 2018 Pharmacy, Health, and Beauty Expo. We have put together a comprehensive program with relevant content, and hopefully you'll see that today as we kick off day one of the conference. We've also put together our traditional strategic one-on-one business meetings, and I think there's lots of fodder that's happening in the industry that will serve as a great platform to have discussions with buyers and suppliers and your colleagues throughout the 2.5 days at the conference. We've also put together unparalleled networking opportunities with tonight's social night, as well as looking at the Chairs Dinner and the night at the Hockey Hall of Fame tomorrow. Of course, none of this would be possible without the support of our partners and sponsors, whose logos are displayed behind me. This year's rosters of speakers demonstrates our commitment to excellence in the quality of the events that we hold. And the insights you're going to gain through our break and learn concurrent sessions, the keynote presentations, and of course you'll have ample opportunity to chat with your colleagues across the industry. Throughout this last year, we've become the acknowledged leader and advocate for the business of pharmacy, especially during these disruptive times. We are the only trade association that represents the entire pharmacy ecosystem, from manufacturers of products to the delivery of care in every neighborhood across the country. Our mission continues to be to foster a business environment that enables strong, cohesive pharmacies to provide patients and consumers with neighborhood access to quality healthcare, products, and services. As I reflect over the last 2.5 years of our strategic plan, we have successfully executed our strategy to be a trusted partner with stakeholders and influence many of the decisions that are happening both federally as well as in the provinces. However, we have much more work to do to realize a favorable business environment for our members and our associates. And we're going to do this by helping to shape health policy and being at the table while mitigating the negative impact of policies and providing new growth opportunities for everyone in this room. Our advocacy focus has always been and will continue to be on the 3 Ps: the patient, the payer, and pharmacy. Our currency continues to be influence, and we have gained the trust with our key stakeholders, and we've developed evidence-based solutions to the problems facing the healthcare system. We need to continue to build on the strength of the association in order to advance pharmacy's role in the evolving healthcare system. While our reputation as an association and an industry has never been stronger, it is even more important during these challenging times to ensure that we continue to collaborate and coordinate all of our activities with our pharmacy partners. We have to resist the tendency to look inward at association mandates and ensure that we are working in unison, or we risk not achieving our collective strategic objectives. As we look into 2019 and building out our next 3-year plan, I think about a presentation that the former CEO of McDonald's gave a couple of years ago. He was at a conference not dissimilar to this, and he posed the question to the audience of what business is McDonald's in? And the typical inevitable questions were raised, or answers. Many said the restaurant business, fast food. And as he listened to the responses, the CEO interjected and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I am in the marketing business." So when I think about that, how do we translate that into the business that we're in the broad pharmacy industry? And what I come up with is that we're in the business of making people's lives better. Whether we distribute products, whether we're providing direct patient care, manufacturing products, we're all looking to make people's lives better and improve the way that Canadians live every day. This is our biggest advantage and the opportunity that our platform affords us when we're talking to policymakers and other key influencers. We have to do more to control that narrative and shift the focus from cost to that of being a solution. We have all of the opportunities in terms of developing care models, in terms of developing products that improve patient care and access and choice. But until we can shift the focus to one of value versus cost, we're going to continue to be caught in this cycle that we're in today. Part of what we're doing as an association is focusing on solutions to problems, aligning with government policy objectives in areas around public health, primary care, and leveraging our role in medication management and drug optimization. We will hear today from panel discussions and throughout the expo about relevancy. What do we have to do as an industry to remain relevant to our customers, our key stakeholders, and be part of the solution in delivering a positive experience? People, whether they're consumers or patients, are looking for things that are going to make them feel better. They're looking for positive experiences. Whether that's through traditional channels or new innovative approaches, we have to focus on what that experience means to our individual customers and to the broader system in terms of our role in providing sustainable healthcare solutions. As our industry continues to face significant headwinds, we are working to advance advocacy initiatives that improve patient choice and access, focus on value and outcomes, and change that constant cycle of deflation that is impacting every member and associate's businesses. Part of what we want to do to set the stage for the next 2.5 days is talk a little bit about our 2018 priorities. Starting first and foremost with the underlying or underpinning components of our business model, increasing the sustainability of that model and aligning with some of the challenges that our healthcare system faces. Part of that work has been underway for the last year as part of our efforts to modernize the reimbursement model. Everyone certainly recognizes the need to provide more innovative solutions and look at our model in a way that is really patient-focused. And as part of our efforts, we undertook a year-long study of international best practices of different reimbursement models and one-on-one consultation sessions with each of our members to synthesize all of the information we were hearing about how do we take our transactional model that has worked very well in the past and shift it into and transform it into a more patient-centric model. At the same time, understanding that being whole is always going to be a challenge, we need to be able to provide a runway for organizations to make the appropriate investments to grow your business. We can't do that in the current model that we're tied to. Part of our effort is to come up with 3 different concepts or frameworks of models that would provide that new platform of services and the transactional and dispensing side. And we're in the early days of this work. We have developed 3 primary frameworks that will certainly evolve and certainly could evolve into something else as we continue through the phase of providing an economic analysis of what this would mean from a business case perspective, the return on investment, the infrastructure that would be required, training and education to fully shift from where we are today into a service-based model. The 3 that we're looking at providing that economic analysis on really center around the need to be driving this bus. We cannot have others driving the bus for us, whether it's private or public payers or others, and we're already starting to see the challenges with Green Shield and others who have gone out with a model that may or may not work well, but certainly we need to be at the table and shaping both the standards of practice that will eventually be measurements used for payment, as well as the underlying business model. So our 3 that we've come up with is one modeled very similar to a Green Shield in that it's outcome-based and it's a continuous quality improvement model. We've also looked at a UK-based type model around rostering that was recently implemented, and a 3rd model that's tiered based on the AQPP model in Quebec in terms of looking at the complexity of the service tied to a fee. Not intended to do a deep dive today, but in the conversations that we have throughout the next 2.5 days, we're certainly open to explaining these models more, what our process is moving forward to broaden the consultations, to ensure that we have the input and support of the entire industry. We see this as a very beginning stage to a longer process, and we want to work with the folks in this room, everything from associates to members, to make this work. As well as the modernizing of the reimbursement model work that will continue to be a priority for us in 2018, we're in the midst of executing a public affairs and communication strategy. I earlier spoke about the challenge we have with respect to being still a soft target. And through the different election cycles, pharmacy continues to be an easier low-hanging fruit to get costs under control in the health budget. We have a perception issue in pharmacy. Key stakeholders have a negative perception of pharmacy, whether that's industry, manufacturing, right through to retail. There are certainly bright spots with the trust that pharmacists have with the public, and a number of areas where we can certainly drive towards more solutions around the value that we provide in services, but the awareness isn't there. And we haven't done a great job as an industry to market our value. So part of what we're going to be doing this year and into 2019 is developing a grassroots program, a campaign that's sustainable and scalable with our partners in the pharmacy association space, as well as driving towards a more favorable public perception of pharmacy. We need to continue working on our reputation and driving through research and evidence-based solutions what the value is, the value of the frameworks that are in place today, and the value of increasing that access and care opportunities in neighborhoods throughout the country. We're going to continue to build on our strengths of policy development and regulatory affairs, looking at strong positions with corresponding advocacy and communication strategies, particularly on both pan-Canadian files and provincial policies related to medical cannabis. There's a great opportunity for pharmacy in terms of bringing patients into the circle of care who are on medicinal cannabis and providing the drug-to-drug interaction checking and all of the other value points that pharmacy provides with the sophisticated supply chain. With National PharmaCare, we have a great opportunity to help shape the dialogue around what is a PharmaCare program, what are the problems that we're trying to solve, and how can we be part of a solution and at the table at both a provincial and national level to help shape what's rolled out. There's clearly momentum across the board for an expansion of PharmaCare. Our goals, as it was back in 2015 when we first established our position, is to ensure we take a principled approach to National PharmaCare. First and foremost, filling the gaps, reducing the gaps of care in the areas where there clearly is challenges of underinsured and uninsured patients, looking at high-cost, high-complex patients with solutions that will drive to filling those gaps, as well as maintaining a public-private mix of coverage and ensuring we increase patient choice and access. On e-prescribing, there's great opportunities to further enhance patient safety and ensure that the transition to an implementation will be smooth and considering of all the different business models. With respect to pricing, there's continued headwinds and challenges related to the PMPRB and PCPA. We know that that's going to have continued downward pressure on the business model, but we need to do a better job in separating ourselves from that and looking at it from a supply chain perspective, drug shortages, continuity of care, and the overall narrative about what we offer in terms of value and what kind of healthcare system in Canada we're trying to achieve and establish. We're going to mitigate some of the risks that are happening at a policy level in the provinces, whether it's related to frequency of dispense and other issues, to ensure that our members are represented and that we continue to drive towards solutions. And protecting competitive tools in the marketplace. With respect to the PCPA and some of the discussions that are happening nationally, it's important that we're part of that solution moving forward. We have a great opportunity from a national perspective to drive towards a solution to the opioid crisis. Something that we've felt very passionate about as an association is that we have a role to play, an important role to preventing dependency of opioids. Our program that was developed in Ontario with the Ontario Pharmacists Association, while intended to be national, is meant to pilot in the province to be able to demonstrate how we can have a positive influence on tapering use of chronic patients on an opioid, as well as stopping dependency on acute patients before it becomes an addiction. There is an important role on the treating of the symptom side with respect to naloxone kits, and pharmacy has played a great, significant role in that, as well as other solutions. But we haven't done enough as a society and as a healthcare system to focus on prevention. This also provides an opportunity for pharmacy to recast our perception about the value we bring by focusing on a solution and delivering with metrics and something that can be actually measured to demonstrate our success and impacts to patient care. So as I conclude this, we do have an opportunity, even though there's a lot of headwinds, a lot of challenges, but we need to pivot from those and find where our opportunities are collectively by working together, not creating any more division in the industry, but by talking and working together to drive better solutions for government across the provinces. I hope during your strategic meetings that you have an opportunity to focus your discussions around the value that pharmacy has and where we are going as an industry so that we can grow our businesses collectively. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our keynote sponsor, Canopy Growth. So please join me in welcoming Bruce Linton, Chairman and CEO of Canopy Growth, to say a few words.
So when you get this job, you're always supposed to say, I'm really pleased to be introducing the guest, and often that's true and sometimes it's not. I'm telling the truth. And the reason is on Rona's bio, it says that she's a policy geek. And you know, I'm Bruce Linton. I founded a company called Tweed. You'd know it as Canopy or Spectrum. And it's become the world's most valued marijuana company, and I've actually never purchased marijuana. So the reason I started is I'm a policy geek too. And I started it because I saw Canada was actually going to take a rational approach to creating a supply chain that had the potential of creating medical outcomes, because until you have a large platform of production, you can't convert that from an ingredient into a finished good. You can't run trials unless you have capital. And so I am truly excited to introduce you, because I only got to meet her almost once, and it was at a AIDS gala. And you know, you go there, and I'm a bit nervous because this is the minister, and then I see that she's actually a nice person, that the people who are the AIDS people that we've been interacting with and having battles and support with really like her. And then they put up the quilt, and it crushes her. And so I was like, I really like this person, and that was about 3 years ago, and I never got to see her again. And so it is a pleasure to introduce you, and I'm genuine in that. I have a little bit to read about her, but I did take the key headline that says a self-proclaimed policy geek. So the Honourable, and I apologize if I screw it up, I keep wanting to call her a hardware supply company called Rona, but it's not, it's Rona. Ambrose is a dynamic national leader, a champion for the rights of women and girls, the former leader of Canada's official opposition in the House of Commons, and the former leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. Rona knows policy. As a key member of the federal cabinet for a decade, she solved problems as a minister of the Crown across 9 government departments. 9, wow. Including serving as Canada's Minister of Health and as chair of the Cabinet Committee for the Public Safety, Justice, and Aboriginal Issues. As a self-proclaimed policy geek, thank you, she is personally responsible for the development of several federal policies ranging from industrial strategies and military procurement to health innovation to improvements to sexual assault laws. Rona is a determined public policy expert who understands that government's actions can have a real impact on families' businesses across the country. In addition to serving as an independent corporate director, Rona is also a global fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Centre for Canada Institute in Washington, D.C., and serves on the Canadian Government NAFTA Advisory Council. By the way, I thought you were quite good on the House as I was listening to it this weekend. I hope the optimism is correct. The Board of Plan International Canada, the Advisory Board of the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, and the co-chair of the Max Bell School of Public Policy in McGill. Please welcome to the stage our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I won't hold it against you that you listen to the CBC. I'm just kidding. Thank you, Bruce. And of course, I have to say, you've probably heard this in your business before, but you had me at high. I knew it would take a minute for you guys to get that one. Yeah, that was a solid. I know he's going to use this now everywhere. But thank you very much to the Neighborhood Pharmacy Association for having me here. Thank you, Justin. Very unfortunate about the name, though. I won't hold that against you. So a lot of you probably have seen me before in the House of Commons. I just actually left the House of Commons not that long ago, last year, where I had to spar daily with Justin Trudeau. But we also had a lot of fun. And you have to tell you, the day that I left Parliament, I looked over at the Prime Minister and I said to him, Justin, never again will there be such an epic battle for the best hair. And we laughed because we used to tease each other about that. But truly, I'm really lucky because I've had a fascinating life in politics. And my last few years in particular, as our national party leader and leader of the official opposition, was exceptionally interesting. Now, granted, I had to come in after what was a tough defeat and really turn things around. And I'm proud that we did that when I left. And I have to say this because we did a lot of hard work. We had the highest membership level ever in the history of our party, and we out-fundraised the Liberals by a factor of 6 to 1, which never happens when you're in opposition. But you know, interestingly, most importantly, Canadians asked us to change our tone, which we did. After 10 years, truthfully, after 10 years in public office, people became very critical of Stephen Harper. But the truth is, Stephen really does love humanity. He just doesn't like people. And now I'm out, and everyone asks me all the time, do you miss being in politics? And I always say to them, seriously? Seriously, which part? Is it the part about the 24-hour work days or the 7-day work weeks? Or would it be maybe the non-stop public scrutiny? Or that adoring, agreeable CBC? Or there's that not being able to go pretty much anywhere ever without somebody recognizing you. And ladies, you know what that means. No late night runs to the 7-Elevens in your pajama bottoms. That just doesn't happen. Or there's that sinking feeling you get when you wake up in the middle of the night in a panic wondering what member of your caucus did what, where, how bad is it, and how am I gonna fix it? Or, of course, there's the backstabbing, the conniving, there's the scheming, and that's on your own team. So no, I don't miss it that much, but do I regret it? Not for a second, not for 1 second. I loved every minute of it, and I considered it to be a privilege of a lifetime to have served the public for 13 years. And I got to work with amazing committed people, and some of you are in this room. And truthfully, I had the adventure of a lifetime. And it started right from the beginning in my nomination. And I actually had to run against 13 people. It was the largest nomination in our party in the country at the time. And you know, it's interesting, when I first ran for my nomination in my region, I was a complete political neophyte. But that wasn't actually why some people decided not to support me. And I'll tell you, I will never forget when I was out door knocking. I was on the doorstep of this man, an older gentleman, and he said to me, thanks for coming out, but the truth is I'll never vote for a woman. Never. He said, you're just not strong enough. And it was interesting because what he was saying is, you're just not physically imposing enough, you're not intimidating enough, you're not loud enough, but what he really meant was you're just not a man. And that's really what he actually meant. But I went on to win that nomination against 11 men. And shortly after that, I was in Parliament. And I'll tell you, I'll never forget my first week in Parliament because I was headed to the front door and I didn't have an executive assistant at the time because frankly, I didn't really understand why you needed all these extra people all the time. By the time I left, I was a minister and I had a huge entourage. But when in the beginning you think, oh, I can do all of this on my own. So this huge stack of books with me, and I was going up to the members' entrance, which is what it's called. And it's where members of Parliament go into the House of Commons. And the security guard steps out and he put his hands out and he said, young lady, where do you think you're going? You're not allowed in here. This is only for members of Parliament. And I said, but I am a member of Parliament. And he said, you don't look like a member of Parliament. And the truth is, this wasn't that long ago. And at that time, only 40 women, less than 40 women had ever sat around the cabinet table. Just think about that in the history of Canada. And shortly after that, I became the youngest woman to be appointed to cabinet in Canadian history. And let me tell you about your first appointment to cabinet. Many of you may not experience it, but I'm going to tell you about it anyway. Everybody who gets elected as part of a government thinks that they should be in cabinet. Don't let them tell you differently. Every one of them does. They all think that they have something really special to offer, and they do. But only so many people get in. And when it happens, you're just sitting there waiting for the phone to ring, right? You're just willing the phone to ring, and because you're waiting for the Prime Minister to call. And in my case, the Prime Minister did call. And he says, Rona, this is Stephen. I've heard a lot of great things about you. I've been really impressed with you, so I'm going to make you the health minister. I thought, wow, that's great. Thank you so much. I'm really excited. I look forward to it. It's a great file. And then he says, but there's this other guy named Tony Clement, and he just lost his riding by only 28 votes. He used to be the health minister in Ontario. So we're going to do a recount. And if he wins, he'll be the health minister. So thanks, and hangs up. I'm like, hello? Hello? So of course I'm paying close attention, and he wins his recount, Tony does, and so the phone rings again. And it's the Prime Minister. Hi, Rona. I've been thinking about things, and I'm going to make Tony the health minister, but I was thinking you are a rookie minister, and you're fairly new to politics, so I was thinking that I would put you in a file where there's no controversy, there's really nothing going on right now, and it'll just give you a chance to really get your feet wet. So I'm going to make you the environment minister. And it was just a few short months after that, there was this guy you might remember called Al Gore showed up. Yes, who wrote a book called The Inconvenient Truth. And it was not long after that I was receiving literally thousands of letters from little kids all over the country asking me to save all the polar bears. It was not all fun and games, let me tell you. I had to have security, I had to have panic buttons installed in my office and in my home because I had my life seriously threatened. I had to have a bodyguard, I had to have undercover police protection. And of course, like every good minister, there was a call for my resignation. You haven't lived politics as a minister until someone calls for your resignation. But my resignation call was extra special, because we were in a minority parliament. And the opposition decided to make it a confidence motion, which means the government would fall and we would go back to an election. And we just had an election. So I went into the Prime Minister's office. He's like, what's going on here? I'm like, well, what's going on here is that they've got this motion, and if it passes, which it probably will, we're going to go to an election. And so I thought he'd have this brilliant strategy to get us out of this problem. But he said, great, let's go to the vote. Let's face them down. And I said, are you kidding me? That is not the response I thought I'd get from him, which means that if we lost, I'd be responsible for an election. And I thought, imagine going out door knocking and everybody across the country is mad that we're back into another election months later and saying, what happened? Well, it's that Rona Ambrose lady's fault. So this wasn't great. But anyway, we faced them down and they backed off. So crisis averted, but talk about a trial by fire in your first time in Parliament. So much for starting with a non-controversial, easy file. But I have to tell you, I'm really glad that that happened, because the file that I ended up with at the end was the health file, ironically. And it's the one that I enjoyed the most, by far. And by then, of course, I actually knew where the washroom was and how things operated. And I can tell you on the health file, especially those of you in this room, you've got a great deal of responsibility on your shoulders. You really do. Dealing with life or death issues that touch every single Canadian. And I think it's important to kind of step back and think about that. Healthcare is by far the most important issue in this country. And it is by far the most important issue that people deal with on a personal level. And yet, in this country, we continue to lurch from crisis to crisis, from strategy to strategy, from framework to framework. It's really a patchwork of systems in this great confederation of ours. And on one hand, it's a recipe for inefficiency, and yet on the other hand, it can be a recipe for innovation. It is far from perfect, but it is worth striving for. There's no doubt about it. And I know that a lot of people in this room are working to improve our health system on a number of fronts, and I thank you for your advocacy and your contribution. Now, a lot of you in particular in this association sit right in the middle of the public and private spheres in healthcare. And I think because of that, you have a incredible opportunity and ability to make the case for the inclusion of the private sector in healthcare. You know, all the advances in delivery platforms are coming from technology. We all know that. Most of which originates, if not all of it, in the private sector. And I just don't see an innovative future in healthcare without a very large private sector contribution. And we all talk about health innovation, but we have a hard time, it seems like, coming to a consensus on what exactly defines innovation. My definition, personally, involves a role for the private sector. It involves a very clear role for private solutions in our public system, not a parallel system necessarily. And it also involves severely disrupting the health system with technology. Health, in fact, is the only industry of its size that has not been truly disrupted by technology. But that is going to change. And I'm glad to say that the kids are going to do it. You know, millennials, well, they're not really kids. Some of you are millennials. But they're the ones everybody describes as the entitled ones. You know, the ones that are going to spend all our money or are already spending all our money. But then after that, there's Generation Z. That's our kids. These kids are described as the self-starters. These are the generation that were born with these platforms in their hands the moment they start to use technology. They're very different. They think differently, and in fact, it's predicted that they're going to save the economy. So that's a good thing. And let me tell you, these kids will not tolerate a doctor-centered health system. They will want a platform that is centered on them, that delivers convenient, responsive care wherever they are. Home or office will be preferable in real time, and they will want to pay for it with cryptocurrency or their Visa card if they're still using them at that point, and they'll want to pay for it online. And the Canada Health Act, they'll say, what? That will not mean much to them. And I think that when we have a generation like that that starts to enforce, use our healthcare system and transform it, they will disrupt the system in a way that is long overdue and completely irreversible. Our kids are actually Generation Z. My kids are sitting at the back. You can wave. It's spring break, so I take them everywhere with me right now. We're going to a Jays game tonight. They didn't actually like it so much when I was the health minister, because I embarked on a change in food labels that targeted sugar content in food. And they never let a day pass without telling me that I killed the Cookie Monster. They literally said that a lot, even to the media. Now those same plans for sugar content, interestingly, are at risk because the US are pushing back on them during the NAFTA negotiations. And so now I'll be able to tell them that Donald Trump has brought the Cookie Monster back from the dead. Finally, our kids will have something to cheer Donald Trump for. We may very well see a national pharmacare program. Justin talked about this sometime in our future. I think it'll happen sooner than you think. And this is not a partisan issue. It's important for you to understand this as you go into the next phase of this debate. I do not think you're going to find a political party that won't support some type of pharmacare. So it's coming. When I was health minister, we started the federal provincial discussions on pharmacare with Eric Hoskins and Yukon Premier Darryl Pezlowski, who were really the leaders in this area, who showed the real interest from the provincial level. And Darryl in particular was working on the bulk buying side of things with the provinces around the cost of drugs and the idea of a national formulary created through bulk buying. And look, I think, you know, my view's always been public, and I'll say it again, but I'll tell you, I think a lot of people share this view, and Justin mentioned it, and this is a challenge and an opportunity for you. We shouldn't have some of the highest costs for drugs in the world. Whether that's true or not, I mean, I've seen the numbers. That's what people think, and that isn't a big issue for your organization to deal with. I also think we can definitely create cost efficiencies. You know that better than anyone in this debate. Whether we think about it through bulk purchasing, like we've done with vaccines across the country, there's ways in which the provinces can work together with the federal government on this. And pharmacare cannot be, it can't just be, you know, extending our coverage to everyone and everything, because that will not reach its intended goals, and it is not in the interest of the taxpayer. It's not affordable. But let me just tell you this, and Justin mentioned it, but you know, he's the CEO, even though he has that name, he's doing a great job. But the point being that it's not just him that has to get involved in this debate. You have to be at the table. Everyone in your organizations have to be at the table because this is going to happen. And I strongly suggest that your group get heavily involved in how this unfolds because this is going to happen one way or another. And you guys actually have the practical experience and the common sense, which isn't always the case in Ottawa. I can say that now because I'm not there anymore. But we are also about to become the first country in the world to legalize medicinal and recreational marijuana. And for those of you in the medical marijuana space, if any of you dislike the regulations imposed on licensed facilities, you can blame me because I was part of putting those in place. But we need to have good, solid policy frameworks and regulations around an issue like this, an industry like this, because it is a serious issue because there are public health consequences. And it's my strong view that companies in this space must take those public health consequences seriously and be a part of this discussion if they want to earn the trust and confidence of Canadians. And I really like the idea. I just saw it happening in the news in the last couple of weeks of these companies actually partnering with pharma companies or partnering with drugstores and pharmacies, because frankly, the bottom line is, and you know this, people trust their pharmacists. They do. They trust their pharmacists with their health. But at this juncture, whether you like it or not, most people think that those in the marijuana space are motivated by personal profit, not by health. So there's a ways to go before, and a lot of work to do to earn that trust of Canadians and that public confidence. But a way to do that, and I thought that was a great partnership to see, was working with pharma companies. And frankly, trust is everything in healthcare. It's everything. You have to earn it, and you have to work hard not to lose it. You know, it's interesting. I've had a lot of experiences in my time as health minister, and I saw the importance of trust front and center during the Ebola crisis. It was one of the most profound experiences of my life. I was the health minister at the time, and we as a country were hit with what could have been the biggest health crisis of our time, and we had very little time to prepare for it. I remember taking that call about the Ebola outbreak from the World Health Organization, and I remember then having to make that call to the provincial health ministers to tell them that we needed to actually prepare for a potential outbreak in this country. And it was crucial in working with them that I earned their trust so that when we worked as a team, Canadians would actually have confidence in the systems that we were setting up. I needed their trust, and I got it, and no matter what the political stripe was, everyone worked together. In fact, it was remarkable to watch. You know, most Canadians, would have just seen it as sort of a headline, but thousands and thousands of people, pharmacists, physicians, nurses, every corner of this country became trained in a matter of weeks on how to deal with a potential Ebola outbreak. It was amazing. We collected safety equipment from all corners of the country to ship over to affected countries. We really did come together. And the truth is, public trust was essential in making that happen. And it's an amazing story for Canadians. The truth is, Canada saved the world from Ebola, literally. And as you know, it was a Canadian researcher at a lab in Winnipeg who developed the vaccine to cure Ebola. You know, it's funny, as a parent, you always wonder if your kids are actually listening to what you do. I was in the middle of the Ebola crisis, and literally every waking moment I spent was dealing with this issue, because Canada was the lead with the WHO because we had the vaccine. And we were at our son's school, who's at the back. I can't remember how old he was at the time. 7? Yeah, 7. And it was around Christmas. And it was really interesting because, I was in such a, my mind was single-minded thinking about this. And we were at the school, and there's all these little pinups. And I said, what are these? And he said, we had to think of something that we would want for Christmas that you can't get at a store. And guess what his was? A cure for Ebola. Because we didn't know that the vaccine worked at that point. So I thought, they're listening. It's a good thing. They're listening. But I wanted to share this with you because it's a really fascinating story. You probably heard about the Ebola vaccine, something Canadians are very proud of. But what you probably haven't heard, and in fact I've really not talked about this publicly much, is that call that I got from Margaret Chan, who was the head of the WHO at the time, at the height of the Ebola crisis, where she asked us if they could have all of the Ebola vaccine and that they could take it and they would use it and deploy it as quickly as possible to the affected regions. At that time, we didn't know if Ebola would strike Canada. And we had to make this difficult ethical decision about whether we should keep the vaccine for ourselves in Canada or if we should send it to the WHO and deploy it to the people that needed it the most. And we urgently began work with a drug company to create more vaccine. But realistically, we really didn't know if it was going to be ready in time, if Ebola actually struck Canada. But we made the decision to send most of it to the WHO, to get it to the people who could be saved. And we ended up keeping a handful of vaccines here in Canada. When I say a handful, I mean a handful. It was not a lot. And that was just the beginning of a series of incredibly difficult ethical dilemmas that I faced as a minister, but also our team faced. And it led to, for instance, a very passionate discussion with the US Secretary of Health at the time, who insisted, and the US is the #1 contributor to the WHO, Canada's #3, we're important, but the US has a lot of influence. She insisted that the WHO not deploy the vaccine to the Ebola-affected regions until full clinical trials were done and we ensured that the vaccine was completely safe. And as all of you in this room know, this would take months. And people were dying, like dying by the day. And we had a vaccine that we knew worked. But the US convinced the WHO that this was necessary. And so the WHO held off on sending the vaccine over to the affected region. The compromise was that the US would take the vaccine and do clinical trials in an expedited manner as quickly as possible in one of their military facilities. So what was a 2-year process was shrunk down to weeks, and that was the compromise. And even though we'd gone through animal trials and we had early indications, very strong indications that it was working on humans in the field, the Americans felt it was unethical to send the vaccine to be used on in the African affected countries without knowing all the risks. And it was a really interesting debate because it was literally about, what if something goes wrong? This will affect how people feel about research, how they feel about vaccines, how they feel about the West versus Africa. I mean, it was a really interesting ethical dilemma. And it was a sound ethical argument for the US Secretary to make. But the argument in favor of sending as much vaccine over as quickly as possible, frankly, held just as much weight. And I have to tell you, at the time, I really struggled with what the WHO decided to do. And at times I wondered what would have been different if we would have kept control of the vaccine ourselves. In my mind, frankly, it was the best opportunity to save people's lives at that moment. But the truth is, while it was a vaccine that was developed by Canadians, did we actually want to be the ones to make the decisions about who got the vaccine, when, and how? It really, I think, was more appropriate for the WHO to take on that role. So in the end, the one good thing, or many good things, was that we were able to argue for a concession and to have the vaccine released for health workers in the affected regions. Because we thought as health workers, and it was agreed upon, that they understood very clearly what the risks were in taking the vaccine before clinical trials were over. And that was a big relief to me. But now that the majority of the vaccine had been handed over to the WHO, it was no longer in our control. Another ethical dilemma began to unfold because people started to understand that we still had some of it here in Canada, even though we had very little of it. And then the calls began to come, and literally the calls came to a person like me. Could we spare a vial for a nurse who had been affected in Spain? Could we spare another vial for a doctor who had been affected in Texas, who would die without it? Another nurse who was impacted on another side of the globe. And I started to ask him, how much more do we have left? Do we have enough for the Canadian health workers? And are we going to be able to treat them if they come back from the affected region? What about the troops that we sent over to Africa to help out? And what if we don't have the drug made or mass-produced in time and it ends up on North American soil? We already had a couple of affected health workers back in the United States. Every one of those calls was really an ethical dilemma I never imagined having to deal with as a minister. And I asked myself, do Canadians come first? You know, as a health minister for Canada, am I obligated to keep these vaccines here in Canada for Canadians? Or does the duty of care supersede that when someone's dying, no matter where they live on the globe? Even things like, do we save some of this for a major emergency? Are we supposed to save some for the head of the armed forces and the prime minister? What do you do in a situation like this? You know, who takes priority? Well, the truth is, health workers took priority. We didn't save any for anyone but health workers, I can reassure you of that. But we ended up sending it to the people who needed it the most. But we had to take a risk that the extra vaccine wouldn't be ready in time if something happened. But you know, I found an amazing experience to go through, and an amazing part of the story, I think, for us to remember as Canadians, is that it was Canadian ingenuity, really, that made this happen. Canadian ingenuity and Canadian compassion that saved lives. They weren't Canadian lives, and stopped a horrible disease in its tracks. And you know how it started? I love this story. From a small, tiny public grant to the Public Health Agency. Who would have known, right? Who would have known? And to a researcher at the time that was researching something that people thought was just some obscure disease. It says a lot about how our health system is constructed that's very different than other health systems. And I love that story. And I'll share another thing with you that also says something. Most people don't know this, but they should. I actually don't think anyone really knows this, but they should. When we were negotiating the contract with the pharma company who bought the vaccine to mass produce it, we had the chance to negotiate a royalty for the researchers who developed the vaccine. So I said to them, name your price. You've earned it. Like, what should we negotiate? How much do you want? And they insisted that they only receive the same sort of pro forma, typical standard Treasury Board royalty that was due to public servants. And that is peanuts. Like, it's peanuts. It really is, frankly. And I tried to make the case to them, you know, convince them that Canadians would want to see them but just that they deserved this. But they refused. And in addition to that, they insisted that their royalty go back into research at the lab. It's an amazing story. It really is. And it's very Canadian. But you know, I think when I reflect back on that story, what I found most fascinating is just you learn about the goodness of this country. And I learned a lot about that when I was health minister. But what became clear to me is at the end of the day, our health system at the most basic level is made up of thousands of people, like the ones I just talked about. Incredible people that have done incredible things. And that includes people in this room, making thousands, if not millions of decisions by the minute, by the hour, and by the day to try and make the lives of Canadians healthier and safer. It's not perfect, but it's definitely worth striving for. And I really do want to commend you on the work that you're doing. You deal with a lot of challenging issues. There's a lot of challenge, but there's a lot of opportunity. And I want to commend you and encourage you to continue to do those. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I do have to end with one point. Of course, I always forget. The guy that said he wouldn't vote for me, that guy, you remember him? He ended up, I've got to tell you this because it's a great story. He ended up showing up at one of my town halls. And he was this old German, like, sort of curmudgeon, and he gave me this rock. And guess what it was? A piece of the Berlin Wall. I know, and it ended up being that he was raised in a very stereotypically traditional family. And he thought, he thought women shouldn't do this, but he'd watched me for a while, and he said, "You renewed my faith in democracy," which I thought was wonderful. And he said, "You'll be the first woman I vote for, and I'm proud to do it." And he gave me this piece of the Berlin Wall and said, "Take it to Ottawa with you." So I love sharing that story because I think, one of the things that is really important to me is the role of women in leadership. So I thank you for having me here today because by doing that, you're supporting women leaders. And I know that the pharmacists, if I can just give a shout out to the 60% of women who work in the pharmacy world. Bravo. Thanks so much for having me here, and have a great conference. Sure. I didn't know I was getting questions, but I'm used to that.
So if we have some extra time, so if there's any questions, I will look for hands. And I don't, do we have a microphone?
Yeah, anything.
Pass around. Okay, I see.
You're much better, a much nicer audience than the press gallery.
Okay, I see a hand up over there.
Oh, that's so funny. I know who put you up to that.
Okay, I see a hand up here. Mona? Jeff, in the middle. This is a great opportunity to ask all those questions you wanted to ask over the last 4 years.
Oh, no.
What's for dinner?
Yeah, right.
I get asked that by my 2 boys, and I commend you as a working mom. I know how difficult that is, but also how rewarding. My question really relates to your comment on pharmacare, and you mentioned that this is a nonpartisan issue. So, I mean, I listened to that very carefully, of course, like a lot of us in the room. What is your advice to us as an industry on how we influence that environment? It's a rapidly changing environment. Didn't seem that long ago that it was sort of like, oh, that's never going to happen. It's too costly, to this, to that. Maybe an NDP issue, never going to come to fruition to, hey, let's have a council to study how we're going to implement it. So what is your advice to us, given that it's coming, and it could have some benefits, some real benefits, but it can have some downsides as well? Yeah.
You know what, I said it's a nonpartisan issue because I think it's surprising how few people know that in 2006, I think it was the 2006 platform for the Conservative Party of Canada, which then we became government, I'm pretty sure it was that platform where Stephen Harper called for a kind of pharmacare. So do not think that if you're anti-pharmacare, you're going to find allies somewhere. The majority of parties, now what they consider to be a pharmacare model will differ. You know, when we were in power and I was the health minister, I made the point that, I hope you didn't take offense to this, but I said, it can't be like an open bar. You know, you can't just extend coverage for everything and everyone without creating efficiencies within some kind of a model, whether it's bulk purchasing or looking at ways to deal with the cost of drugs. And so we started to do that kind of modeling when we were in government, and I'm sure that work continues. I know it does behind the scenes. I mean, my advice to you is to wrap your heads around the fact that this is going to happen in some way. Whether it's a Conservative government, don't expect a newly elected Conservative government to say, we're not going to do this, because I think they're going to find a way. We already had started. So I think the best thing you can do is what Justin is advocating for, and you're already doing, which is to be at the table. You've got to be at the table. And don't expect other people to do the work for you. Don't expect political parties to oppose something for you. You need to figure out what is the best model for Canadians. You might have to compromise in a way that you may not have thought you were going to. But being at the table and coming up with a real solution that you can live with, Canadians can live with, that moves the yardstick forward a bit is the best thing for you to do. I can tell you, I've dealt with a lot of people a lot of associations and organizations that just think it's all going to work out. And don't sit down with you've got to sit down with every political party, figure out where their head's at, try and influence their policy process in ways that you can. You've got lots of people and friends in this room that are friends with lots of different people in different parties. Start to work with them on what their policy looks like. And that's important because you have all the research. You've got all the numbers. You know how this is going to pan out. You know what the consequences of each policy model looks like. I can guarantee you. I know everybody thinks governments are, well, you probably don't think this, but a lot of people think governments sort of have all the information. They don't. You've got to go to the table and offer that information, especially to the opposition, because they have very little research capacity. So I really, I know you're already doing that, but do not take that process for granted.
I have a question.
Okay.
I don't know if that's allowed, but I'm going to.
Well, I'm used to taking questions from Justin.
Well, there you go. I figured I'd just, continue
Yeah.
with that theme for you. But this will be hopefully a softball, not a hard question. But we are, as an industry, very interested in your advice about how do we increase pharmacy's role in the dispensing and distribution of medicinal cannabis, particularly with recreational now rolling out, a little bit delayed, but certainly looking at some of the risks to public health, public safety, ensuring that there is the, I would say, circle of care still for medicinal patients. What would you recommend as our course of action to have the ACMPR expanded to include pharmacists?
I think it's very important to do that. I think you also need to think about, this wasn't your idea, okay? So don't believe you have to solve all the problems, but you do have a lot of the good ideas. But this was the government's idea. So if they're going too fast on any particular area, be it public health, be it public safety, and because at the end of the day, whatever the consequences are, yes, that will reflect on the government badly, but it'll also reflect on your industry badly. So you do need to be working with government to make sure that they're keeping pace as to in terms of what's happening on the ground, because in their mind, they just want to reach a political promise deadline, right? They just want to reach a legislative deadline. I know this sounds overly simplistic, but it is a big deal when you're about to go into an election, right? And it's not necessarily at pace with where you're at, and you're the one dealing with the stuff on the ground. And if things go badly, it won't just be them that suffers. It'll be your industry that suffers. So I really recommend you working together. And I think, can't remember what company did this, but a couple weeks ago I saw that one of the drugstores is working with one of the canopy groups or one of the marijuana groups. And I think that's good because, as I said in my speech, the truth is, whether you like it or not, if you're in this industry, you do not have the public confidence of Canadians right now. People see, all you have to do is watch BNN for any length of time, and people believe that people are in the marijuana business for personal profit. It's not, no one has a health framework in mind. You can call it medicinal and medical all you want. That's not what Canadians think is happening here yet, even if they're using it. So if you want to gain any kind of public confidence and earn that trust and be in a medical space and in a health space, then you need partners that have that credibility and actually have the trust of Canadians on these issues. And we think of like drug interactions and dispensing and all the things that go with that. Where do people go for their trusted advice? It's already there. It's pharmacists. That's who they interact with and that's who they trust. So I think there's some synergies there, I think.
Great. Any other questions? Okay, if not, thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me and good luck with your conference.